All right, we're back for episode 103 of Digital Divination. Unfortunately, Jason is packing up his house, so he is unavailable this evening.
I mean, the advantage of us doing this remotely is he's packing up and moving away, but it's not like we have to get together in person to do this. So we could look forward to seeing him again as long as we can pull him electronically from being further away.
Oh, for sure, we'll get him, and I think he'll have better lighting. I actually gave him one of my lights, and and it'll be a different room, so it'll be interesting. It'll be fun.
Okay, yeah, we see his different background. Um, and speaking of, things that are going to be improved or cleaned up or whatever, I need to make sure I clean this out of the way and say that I'm an employee of Wizards of the Coast, but my opinions are not theirs; they are my own.
Very good. That's a nice segue there. So I didn't have to try to work up something. Uh,
Oh, thank you. How've you been, John?
I've been busy. We got up to Camino this weekend, and so we have your dog dishes.
Oh yeah, we left him up there when we were there. We were The problem is we just didn't look down enough when we were making sure that we
Yeah,
sort of had everything. So
yeah. Um, but we were able to go up there, and then my daughter actually came down from Vancouver with a bunch of friends Saturday night. So we took them out to dinner, and they're going to go skiing. They went skiing up at Mount Baker. They're going to go several days because
oh
even though
neat.
it's the same distance from Camino to Baker as Vancouver to Baker, they avoid that whole border wait.
Oh yeah.
So
Because they come down because the ones that are in Camino, they're like, now we can go to and from. We don't have to keep going over the border and
yeah,
so on. Yeah, that's
and
that's
they
very
have to be
nice.
done by 3:30 on the slope, so they get back to Camino like at 5:30, and they can still hang out and have fun. So
Is it because it gets so dark on the side of the mountain so soon,
yeah,
or
they
why
want
does it
everybody
close so
off the
soon?
mountain before it gets dark. I think they must not have lights up there, and
Yeah, where I grew up in Utah, a lot of the resorts had night skiing,
right, right.
and the reason you wanted to get off the mountain is because you had to pay different. You had to pay for the night skiing if you hadn't
Yes.
already, and they didn't
Oh,
have the entire. They didn't have all the runs open. It was just a
right.
few of them that they had very well lit. But it was fun. I went up night skiing a couple of times. Sometimes I put in the very very long day of let me get this full pass that's going to be all day long and then all night
Right.
as well. Um, it's fun. It's been a while since we've been skiing. We went down to White Pass here in
Mhm,
Washington,
mhm.
and that was a lot. That was really good for my kids because it's a really a lot of good beginner slopes and good
Right,
sort of
right, right.
education. Um, so that was before the pandemic. I was just going through, console of my car, and I'm like, oh, we've got this pass that would be good for the following year at White Pass, and then they shut everything down. I wonder if this is even
Yes.
good for anything anymore.
Well, they might have done something, grandfathered it in because of that.
They might. We'll find out. It's just been such a non-winter feeling winter around here that
Yeah.
I've got stuff in my yard that's popping up like springtime. So I'm like, maybe we
Yeah.
don't get another good hard freeze or anything. The plants all think spring is here.
Well, I hope so. I enjoy the warm weather, especially out of Camino when on Saturday it was all sunny out and it was just such a lazy day laying around in the sun there, inside. So,
I don't know if I mentioned that when I went up, I had a stack of kind of work I needed to get done that I was going to bring with me. And then I forgot it at home. And the
oh,
only thing I brought was a couple of drafts of books my brother's written that I'm reading for him, and they're
yeah,
just a series of fantasy novels that are
yeah,
fantastic. I'm excited when I'm going to be able to push those.
yeah.
But he wanted me to do kind of a read for him and give him his thoughts, and that was all I'd brought with me. So I'm like, yeah, just casual, lazy day reading kind of a cool fantasy novel with a pen in hand to kind of
Yeah,
mark
nice.
stuff up.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, for today, I played some organized play. We came back on Sunday, and I hadn't played with my local lodge for a while, so I played a game this afternoon. And when we were getting started, one of the players was asking our venture captain, Jocelyn, about what's going to happen to Starfinder 1 characters when Starfinder 2nd edition comes out. And he was a little dismayed that basically everything had to start over from scratch. And
Is it? But start over from scratch if you want to play the new stuff, but you can
right.
play
Well, you can
everything
keep
that
playing.
exists.
Right. And I
Yeah.
told them that. You could keep playing. And, we chatted actually quite a bit afterwards. And he said, yeah, but I don't want to be left behind. I think everybody's going to be moving on. And which is kind of what we saw when Pathfinder First Edition came out. A lot of people were a little hesitant, and then now it's like that's the you know folks that are playing First Edition are somewhat isolated compared to Second Edition.
Yeah, and there I mean, it's still available. I have seen,
Right?
like, lists of stuff that's being run at
Yeah,
conventions, and I'm like, "Oh,
yeah,
that's like a Pathfinder First Edition, organized play." There's some people who still play that game. I'm in a, Skull and Shackles Pathfinder First
yeah,
Edition game, and that's been kinda fun. It feels clumsy in some ways that the Pathfinder Second Edition rules intentionally repaired, but it's a kind of a comforting clumsiness, right? I'm like, "Oh,
yes,
this spell's totally gonna break this encounter because I
yeah,
remember this spell
yeah,
breaking this guy." And it doesn't break encounters anymore, but it'll be kind of cool to break this encounter
yeah.
when it does.
Yeah. So what I was thinking that we could talk about is, maybe how players can adapt to these edition changes because we see Pathfinder Second Edition coming out with remastered. We see Starfinder coming out with the Starfinder Second Edition playtest and then Second Edition, and we see D&D in your wheelhouse. Going from Fifth Edition to one D&D. September is this year, right?
It
That's when the
is, and
player's handbook.
let me clarify, it's going from 5th edition to 5th edition. I mean, it's still staying the 5th edition of D&D.
I said
1
one
D&D is the
D&D, yeah.
name. Yeah, 1 D&D is the name for sort of the broader penumbra of a bunch of different ways to play
Right.
D&D, which is still the 5th edition. But,
Mhm.
I think we pushed the 1 D&D name really hard without as with some maybe sufficient clarification about what we're gonna do with
Right,
specifically the tabletop game. And
right,
so a lot of people I see them talking about 1 D&D, and I know in their hearts they mean the tabletop game, but I'm like,
right.
you're talking about something bigger than that. It's,
Right, because the
um
VTT and they have a separate,
yep, exactly,
video
exactly.
thing, and, yeah, I've seen a bunch of that kinda come together. But still, some changes across the board, and
Mhm,
some
yep,
people are really kinda locked into what they have been playing for 5, 6, or more years, right? 10
mhm.
years in the case for 5th edition, as it's now.
Or Pathfinder First Edition, it was going
Yeah,
strong for 10 years, right?
yeah,
That
yeah.
was that 8? 10? So, I mean, a long time, very
Yeah,
long
I
time.
I think it's they were in organized play was in its 10th season when the switchover happened.
Okay.
So I assumed it was 10. And so I was actually thinking that both, Starfinder, because Starfinder's just starting its 7th season, going over, and then even 2nd edition Pathfinders will be starting its 6th season and it's
Mhm.
going to remaster. Those time frames have tightened up a little bit.
Yeah, they have, and that's gonna vary a lot based on the game. I saw that later this summer, Ars Magica is doing sort of a rules refresh,
Hmm,
unlike the change from Starfinder First Edition to Starfinder Second Edition, where it's really a new game. A
mhm,
lot of games are doing this incremental changes to preserve backward compatibility.
right,
And there's some good marketing reasons for that. There's some good play reasons for that. But that's what Pathfinder Second Edition is doing with the remaster. It's what Fifth Edition is doing with Fifth Edition, and it's what Ars Magica is doing, sort of compiling a lot of stuff here.
mhm,
Uh, I think that there's a sort of a healthy skepticism that people have when they hear the words backward compatibility,
right,
and that's fair. I think that if you had looked between 3.5 edition D&D and Pathfinder First Edition, which was billed as backward compatible,
right,
it is only backward compatible in the most technical sense because as soon as Pathfinder First Edition got its advanced player's guide and it introduced traits and it introduced archetype and stuff I mean, it's just the game itself used the same engine, but it just did so many awesome things with it that it
mhm,
felt really dated to play the earlier version rather than the newer version. And I feel like we've already seen for fifth edition D&D, some of the new classes are going to have some, very appealing new
right,
architecture and abilities. The remaster, the way it's reworked some of the classes that didn't seem to work so well last time. I haven't really dug into the changes for the witch necessarily, but I know that the player core 2 is going to have the champion and the sorcerer coming as
mhm,
well.
mhm,
Um, I think that even being able to play the older versions, the intent is, look, we've been able to preserve these they work within the rules, but you're going to want to be playing the newer version. They're going to be kind
right.
of, sort of. neater, better.
Yeah,
I think
it's
so. I think that's worth keeping in mind is the difference between
mhm,
those things that are here's a change that's going to happen and nothing you have is going to work versus here's a change that's going to happen and everything you have is going to work, but maybe some things will work better.
right, right. Yeah, I was actually thinking about you mentioned about remastered and second edition. It's like one of the things. So we're running a Fist of the Ruby Phoenix campaign, and that was written in the Pathfinder second edition, and we haven't really brought out the remastered rules because so much of what's already in the adventure is set with the rules from second edition. Things like alignment that get tossed out and everything. They're pretty broadly highlighted there. So it's not the kind of it would be more work for me as a novice second edition GM to try to change it up. And I can see other people, if they're running old adventures, that maybe they wouldn't adopt all the new stuff or maybe adopt certain pieces of it. With Starfinder going over, that's that'll be impossible, right? You would have to convert from Starfinder first edition to second edition, and in all likelihood, the second edition stuff, especially the game mechanics that they've kind of demonstrated already, is going to be way cooler anyway. So it'll be maybe you don't want to do that.
Well, and then let me get back to this person you talked to who asked the question, hey, as a player,
Yeah,
what do I do? I can give you two let me give you two very unhelpful answers to that. And one of them is very unhelpful because it's, well, look, if you're playing in a bunch of campaigns, just play in one that is the new rules and you can keep playing in the old one as well if you want to.
yeah,
But that assumes people have the flexibility and the ability to do so. Somebody who's just a player, they kind of have to go along with what the group says.
hmm
And in a lot
hmm
of cases, the group has to go along with what the GM says. And so if the GM is very excited about moving from Pathfinder Second Edition to the remaster set of the rules, then the players kind of don't, in fact, have very much choice in the matters. They don't have the decision to be, oh well, I'm going to enter this, join this new game that uses the remaster, but all my pre-remaster stuff is going to continue to happen in the old game. They might not be able to have that. So that's why that necessarily isn't very helpful. The other not particularly helpful answer is just finish up the campaign you're in and
yeah,
then start the next one with the updated version of the rules that you want to play. The reason that's not very helpful is because some people get very attached to some very long running games and they're like, you're
right.
telling me just bring my 5-year campaign to a sudden and abrupt closure?
hmm
Well, maybe take a year to do it. Well, that still can feel like a sudden and
yes,
abrupt closure if you've been
yeah,
playing it for
yeah,
5 years, right?
yeah.
So that's maybe not helpful either. So I guess the way to maybe push that conversation back is to really focus on the fact we're saying, what do you do if your campaign that of choice that you prefer is having an update and you're going to be going along with it, one way or another.
hmm hmm Yeah, and that's kind of it didn't even occur to me, quite frankly, when you mentioned this, that there would be any issue moving to Starfinder Second Edition. Because even though I've run hundreds of games in Starfinder and got a 5 Nova status and stuff, and I'll have to start from scratch if I want to do that in Second Edition. I'm just excited for Second Edition, and I have a huge sunk cost in First
Yeah,
Edition
we can see it right
stuff,
behind you there.
and it's
Yep.
like, well, that's okay. I enjoyed those books. I was I saw this quote earlier actually I think this weekend where it's like don't don't be sad about the things you've lost. Don't cry about the things that have gone by like that. Just smile and remember the good times you had for them. So it's the idea that you experience a lot of fun going through these things, and
Mhm.
even if you choose to go on, even though it's something new, you still have those memories and that fun and that adventure, and that those stories are still there. What's really changing is just kind of the mechanics of what you're doing, and you can, kind of recreate a lot of those same stories with that same group in a new system if you want, even.
Yep. I mean, or not. One of the things you can do is have a
Yeah,
conversation with the system. And I know
yeah,
there are people who are playing the original Dungeons and Dragons or second
hmm
edition or 3.5, that Paizo put out because they've got a sunk cost into those.
Yeah.
The Skull and Shackles game that I have, the GM is perfectly willing to learn Pathfinder Second Edition, but he's like, I'm not going to really devote a lot of time to it because I've got so much of this old catalog of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So he's not going anywhere. There are people who are going to be experiencing the older system. It's not being taken away from
Right.
anybody, and so it's certainly available to be used over and over for years and years and years if you want to.
Hmm.
But for somebody who is sort of being dragged along with it. This is something that happened to me, a couple of times. I was excited and early adopter for a lot of games, a lot of different editions of D&D. I'm like, oh, fourth edition, that's going to be very, very exciting. I was very excited about that. I was playing that as soon as recently as last year. I was playing fourth edition with friends, but there were, long after I think people had since moved on. But there are still people who play older editions of the game. But it has happened to me from time to time where a new rule set is coming and I'm just not interested in adopting it. And I have to be honest saying the remaster for Pathfinder Second Edition is one of those because I'm running, you mentioned that you're running Fists of the Ruby Phoenix. I'm not quite halfway through Strength of Thousands.
Right.
And the idea, which is very, very wizard heavy,
Yes.
and wizards change a lot in the remaster. Like, look, rather than navigate that, I'm sticking with the
Hmm.
original. Can we use a different term for being flat footed? Sure, right. Um, but we also don't have to, right? We can just keep doing what we're doing. Um, so that puts it kind of on the other side of things, where somebody's like, "Hey, this as a player, this is a new exciting thing." But my group isn't yet going along with it, right? It's the other
Right.
side of that same question, right? In one hand, I'm being pushed into changing the system that I like playing to wait, I'm not graduating into the system I'd prefer to be playing, the new thing.
Right. Right.
A lot of it really comes down to the social contract with the group that you have. Talk to
Hmm.
the people
Hmm.
that you play with about what you like, what you want, what you don't like. I think that people don't spend enough time, and this is something that I like to do at the close of each of the books because there's some real natural stopping points in Strength of Thousands. It's just kind of a check-in, Hey, are we liking this? Are we liking the campaign as it's being run? Do we like the rules as they're being run? And then being open to a discussion, invite all the players to
Yeah.
have their opinion. And a lot of them are like, I don't want to change anything. I spent so much time learning this. I don't want to change to
Yeah.
something else. Um, but if you're the sort of person who wants to be trying sort of a new iteration of something or an entirely new system of the same game, the way Starfinder First Edition is going to Starfinder Second Edition,
Hmm.
then the conversation with your group is the important thing there, I think.
Yeah. And I think we're fortunate in that we play with a mix of people and different groups. I play with you a lot, but I also play with some other folks.
Mhm.
And I can get a taste of a bunch of different systems and see what I like, what I don't like, and what's changed, what's new. And I, so for me, it doesn't seem so cumbersome to have to change to something if that's what a group decides to do, because, oh, I'm playing with a group over here that's already done that. Or here's a group that is not changing anything, or they're doing something completely different. Um, but it is funny though when we're at the table and this happened, I think, last Wednesday. I was trying to remember a term for something, and I was mixing up 3 different systems, right, for for the term. What is I and I could not I didn't know which one was right, so it's just, as long as people are happy to point out the correct term, then, it's okay.
Well, yes. And I've got what is it? I'm currently in my mind. I mean, I've got to keep. I think 6 different systems together. I think the games I'm in span 6 different systems.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm certainly not going to remember in which one is it an opportunity attack, and in which one is it
Yes.
an attack of opportunity, and in which one does it not actually matter because that's not a thing that happens in this game.
Right, right, right. Yeah, so it's, but I think we're, for a lot of players, especially the one I was talking to, he he just plays organized play. I mean, He's played maybe some short adventures, but for the most part, it's weekly organized play with a lot of the same people.
Mhm.
But he's not doing a whole lot of other games, and so I think that's where he's feeling like, I've committed so much to these characters I have in the system. It'll be very strange for him just to give that up, and he doesn't even GM a lot, so it's not like he's losing any those credits. And when first edition went to second edition, I think there was some
For Pathfinder?
yeah, there was some opportunity for crossover of achievement points or something. I vaguely recall.
Whatever the credits were at the time,
Yeah,
and
yeah, if you were doing org play and switch. So um yeah, so that'll be
yeah,
interesting.
and that's not unusual. There are a lot of
Mhm.
people who are getting together socially first and to play a
Right.
game second. And if you've been hanging out with the same group of people to play a game for, every Monday night for the past, 9, 12, 15, 20 years,
Yeah.
it's not easy to tell that person, "Well, just go play something else with another group of people," right? That's a non-starter for what
Yeah,
it is they wanna
that's
do.
tough. Well, I've not played like you've played in groups where you've had folks for 20 years, right?
Yeah, they've got the every other Friday Torg Eternity group I have
Yeah.
is almost entirely other people I played with when I was in high school and in my first couple years of college.
But
So
it's not been a continuous 20 years, or has it?
it has not been oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know how the biggest breaks have been a
Yeah.
few years, but
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
not a long period of time.
Yeah.
And it's we have, and this is something I know a lot of people don't have. We've got some flexibility in moving around from game system to game system, from GM to GM. So somebody who's
Right.
running, our main GM who's running Torg Eternity, occasionally will want to break, and somebody else will, well, let me step in because this Starfinder or this excuse me, Spelljammer box set looks really cool. And oh, I looked at the adventure. I didn't like the adventure so much, but the setting's really cool. So I'm just going to spin off this totally unrelated story to the
Yeah.
adventure about the stuff that goes. I mean, it's, and then we move into that, and then because we get together with this same group, and every one of us also plays with other people.
Right.
It's kind of funny sometimes that some of the other things they've done, the other groups that each of us are in, is kind of spokes on a wheel, right? Where we suddenly mention. I know some of the players play a whole lot of Savage Worlds, and I played
Right.
some Savage Worlds. I really like it. I've got some of it right on my shelf back here. Um, but it's been years and years since I played it. Whereas I was mentioning to one of the other players, um, fifth edition, the Wild Beyond the Witchlight adventure, which is kind of the whimsical fairy one. And she's like, "Yeah, I've played that 2.5 times already. Like the campaign is so fun that I played it with
Wow.
one group and we finished it, and then I played it with a whole different group with a different character and we finished it. And I'm about to like get to the midpoint of the second run of it. I'm like, I
Wow.
had I had no idea." So that's kind of fun. But the thing that keeps us together is the games that we're playing that we kind of switch on, and whenever those get updated, it becomes something that we decide whether or not we're going to
Right.
embrace. We could keep playing Torg as it was in the '90s, but we've all kind of gotten together for the new edition of Torg, which is a
Mhm.
little bit quite a bit more like the jump between Starfinder First Edition and Starfinder Second Edition, in that it is thematically very similar. The feel of the game is similar, but the mechanics don't really translate over. It's not
Mhm.
backward compatible.
Right, right. Well, I think one advantage that Starfinder Second Edition is going to have is its cross compatibility with Pathfinder Second Edition, and probably remastered by
Hmm.
extension. In that there's a lot of Starfinder players who play Pathfinder Second Edition now, and there's a lot of Second Edition players who haven't played Starfinder because it's too different from
Hmm.
Second Edition. So I'm hoping that kind of seeds enough players are interested in trying and going with it that it'll pick up steam pretty quickly.
I think that's likely. And one of the ways that'll pick up steam pretty quickly, I'm willing to bet, is the third party content creators,
Yeah.
because it would be very difficult to do. immediate third party content creation for Pathfinder Second Edition because it was just so new. But
Mhm.
if you're going to assume that Starfinder is going to have a lot of the same rules as Starfinder Second Edition is going to have a lot of the same rules as Pathfinder Second Edition, you can build encounters and determine treasure and, kind of know the narrative beats that Starfinder First Edition has that are going to carry through and be more ready to go, day one when they start
Right,
opening that for
right,
Starfinder Second Edition. What that means as a player, as a GM and a player, is you'll have an incredibly wide selection of ways to expand the game, and it will feel more robust right out of the gate
right.
than a lot of non backward compatible games do. So, backward compatible games tend to feel pretty robust right out of the gate because even if you can't use something that was 15 years before, you can use something that was the prior year or the year
Right.
before that.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's a fair point with that, and the other thing I'll say that I enjoy, and it's a lot of it's the same with first edition Pathfinder and second edition Pathfinder, is the carryover of the lore, right? So a lot of the
Mhm.
the basic lore is there, and then kind of expanded upon with the newer edition. And I envision we're going to see some of that. And in fact, it's been alluded to, right, for Starfinder Second Edition that there'll carry over a bunch of the lore, but it'll kick off with a big change as well.
Right. Right. The actual change in the lore and the tone might be something that we don't see for years. I had
Hmm.
a very savvy friend of mine observe that now in retrospect there is a pretty big difference in the feel between Pathfinder First Edition and Pathfinder Second Edition. Pathfinder First Edition is really it's got kind of a horror veneer over a lot of different types of adventure, and Pathfinder Second Edition has sort of a veneer of wonder over the top of a lot of
Oh
things. Which
yeah,
isn't to say there
yeah,
wasn't any wonder in First Edition,
yeah,
and there's I can't say there's not horror in Second Edition. There is, but the the sheer number of sort of different weird things that you can do in Pathfinder Second Edition, and let's do sort of deep cultural dives in a lot of different cultures you
right,
haven't seen before. That's a real sense of wonder that Pathfinder First Edition didn't give. Pathfinder First Edition had a lot of writers who were very big fans of horror of all sorts of different types. Cosmic horror to very personal, sort of, slasher horror and things like that.
right.
And a lot of those things carried over into the game. So I think that the Starfinder theme thus far, the Starfinder First Edition theme, although it'd be kind of hard to pin it down, I would have to say that it is in variance. That is to say,
Mm.
I can tell lots of different types of science fiction stories.
Right, right,
And sometimes they're very different. The Dawn of Flame is a very different story than Attack of the Swarm, which is a very different story than Signal of Screams, because the game is pulling on a lot of science fiction tropes and it's pulling those into different adventure paths and different sort of ways to build the game. I think that as established as Starfinder is now, Starfinder Second Edition might not need to pull into as many tropes and be its own kind of thing that has
hmm
a lot of different styles of play. Of course, they'd be, they don't want to jettison that option, but I think that it's probably, if I were to guess, maybe we can come back in 3 years and mention this.
yes,
I think that, like 3 years from now, it'll probably be people saying Pathfinder First Edition felt like it was a little scattershot in trying to do a lot of different things, and it did a lot of them well. It did some of them maybe not so
yeah.
well. But Second Edition is a lot more sort of thematic whole on what goes on.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but we'll see.
Yeah, and I think they've, the team has actually changed over like 100%, except for yes, Thirsty, right, from first
Hmm.
edition to Starfinder second edition. But they've a bunch of them have kind of grown with Starfinder first edition, how it's developed, and it looks like that the same themes are going to carry through. I would guess just from the folks that are in charge of the books and the adventure paths and things, which I enjoy. But with the change of some of the folks, yeah, I don't know. Is that that yeah, there's been enough change. I have no idea what's gonna happen.
Well, there is, and there's let
Yeah,
me, and
yeah,
I'm, while I'm just
yeah,
relentlessly speculating,
yeah, I know.
one of the things that I see of the change, see as a change that's already kind of building in,
Mhm,
between first and second edition is a lot of the people who are in charge of Starfinder second edition have come up. Thirsty's an excellent example. Has come up through organized play of Starfinder
right,
First Edition, and that
right,
matters. And that matters because organized play has always been about big arcs of things that happen and how you can
yeah,
fit a lot of different adventures into big narrative arcs of things that happen.
right,
Now, a lot of those narrative arcs have been constrained by the types of books they put out, right? Oh, we're
mhm,
doing a near space book. So we've got this, an arc that's going to be about, near space and what happens in there. Or we've got galactic magic. So we've got an arc that's specifically with a lot of, sort of magic baked into it. But because those people are now in charge of even the rules supplemental books, they're
right,
thinking in ways that are going to make the whole arc fit with the rules you learn as well. And we've seen it. We've seen
right,
it kind of a
right,
little bit with the Drift Crisis
right,
as a huge arc story with a lot of narrative heft attached to it and a lot of rules that underpin it.
mhm, mhm,
So I think we're probably going to see a lot more of that with things on the Pathfinder side, like War of the Immortals being kind of a big event that comes in. I feel
mhm,
like the whole company is kind of moving in that direction. So I think we'll see a
mhm,
lot more of those. So much so that a lot of sort of the independent kind of scattershot approach will probably still appear in adventures and maybe the occasional AP, but I think that we'll see it as the exception rather than the rule in
right,
Starfinder Second Edition.
right. Well, and, yeah, I seem to recall, like, with the adventure paths, one of the things they did, even though it had a consistent theme through it, they always had book 3 or 4 was, "Let's throw a monkey wrench, and it's gonna be completely different," right?
Yeah, it
You
was
think
number
that
5. 5 of 6
is
was
it 5?
always let's go off to a
Yeah,
different plane or
yeah.
let's go off to a different. Yeah.
So, do you think that would change, or it's gonna be kind of the same?
I do think it will change. And
Yeah.
the reason it's going to change is because we felt like when telling 6-part stories that
Oh,
a
right,
theme might have started to get stale and needed a little bit of refreshing.
got it.
Hey, let's stretch our limbs a little bit and show you something interesting we can do, by about book 5, sometimes book 4, right?
Right,
But maybe sometimes book 5 was pretty typical on the Pathfinder side. But now with the willingness to accept 3-part or
right.
4-part stories, I think we're going to see sort of a tighter cohesion there. And I also think it's not, and this is Jason's the one who would be able to maybe say more about this because he's the one who's
Yes.
actually in the company now.
Yeah,
But there is still some sort of difference on the Pathfinder side between the group of people who are rules people doing stuff that they want to do as rules for the game and the narrative
right,
people doing narrative things they want to do for the game. With Starfinder, those are all the same people. And
right,
so if they
right.
have something that they want to do rules for because it has a big narrative lift, it's not two groups trying to talk to each other. It's literally the same people. So
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and actually the adventure paths are gonna be different going forward as well. They're gonna be single books. So
right.
they'll still be multi-part. They'll still have separate authors working on different parts, but I would imagine that they'll maybe more integrative all the way through. I don't know.
And I think that I want to give Paizo some latitude there as well.
Yeah,
The announced Starfinder adventure paths are all sort of standalone one book hardcover, I think, things they're going to do,
right.
but that's only two, right? That's a sample
Yeah,
size of two. I don't. That I'm not going to be the kind of person who locks them into that going forward when they decide, hey, we're going to do some flexibility and maybe breaking up into a subscription model of a multi-part is going to be better off for us. There's a reason they've
well,
done that for years and years and years. It's a consistent revenue stream when you have subscribers, and that lets you do a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily get when you're trying to gamble in a Hollywood blockbuster style. Is this going to be
right.
a big movie or is this going to be a small movie? And
Well, I think one of the reasons why they went to the whole book is because usually, book number 1 and maybe 2 are big sellers, but when you get into 5 and 6,
mm,
oftentimes they weren't selling as much, and so if you bundle them all together, I'm guessing they were capturing more of that, but maybe they were losing more upfront because of the bigger upfront cost.
I don't know, yeah, and I feel like they're still kind of feeling their way with that because they
Yeah,
haven't yet
yeah,
gotten to. I mean, we have the Scoured Stars in our hands, but we don't have Mechageddon in our hands, and we don't,
right,
which means there
right,
isn't any sort of sales data on that, right?
right, right,
Um,
right.
but I do. I mean, but I trust them to deliver narrative content in a way that connects with the rules, especially on the Starfinder side when it's the same people,
Mhm.
and delivers it in a way that's going to be as successful as they can make it for themselves. And if that means I'm buying one big book and running an adventure out of one big book, or I'm running
Yeah,
it out of six different books, then that's just fine as well. We were talking before we got on about
yeah,
the Beetle and Grimm's set for Fandover and the Shattered Obelisk, Fandover and Below. And one of the different form factors is instead of being a book with the entire adventure, the Beatles and Grimm version has a lot of booklets that's that are each individual chapter. So you take kind of whatever chapter you're in, just use that. And that really struck me as being, oh well, Paizo is kind of going back and forth between these models as well.
right,
Do we
right.
do
Yeah,
a
I
bunch of books, one each month or every other month, or do we do one big, chunky, adventure filled hardcover? And they're going to go
well,
back and forth as
and
they.
if they did that, because they make well, they were making, I don't know if they do now still, they made battle cards for the APs and they made, pawns for the APs. Now they're not doing those anymore. If they put together like this Fist of the Ruby Sphinx, I have all the individual pieces,
Mhm.
but if for a future AP they had all the pieces like Beetle and Grimm's had for the adventure in one place, and I was going to run it, I would think really hard about just getting the whole shooting match. I think that would be kind of a neat thing to do rather than trying to piece it together yourself. Or in the case now, if you don't have pawns for things, having to get a bunch of minis that you were gonna that would fit all the monsters and creatures and NPCs.
Yeah, and I guess will people pay for that, and how much will people pay for that
Mm,
is part of an ongoing conversation there. It certainly
yeah,
was when I was there, so I imagine it is now as well. There's a lot of thought into, okay, what does this component cost us to include? What
right,
cost us to produce separately from what do we include in a specific thing? I know some of the stuff that comes out like beginner boxes, there is
right,
just a whole lot of weight and back and forth in what tokens go in there, what stands go in there as far as the bases for the pawns that are in there
yeah,
versus, the booklets versus, and so that has to be multiplied to a much bigger degree when you're talking about here is a multi-part adventure and we're putting it
yeah,
all together into one big thing, and how does that going to work? Yeah, the mechanics of making that happen are probably
yeah.
very daunting.
And I might be an outlier in my willingness to have the
To just
convenience and
give it
being
to me
willing
all
to
at
pay
once.
for it.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, because the things that you want are going to be slightly different than whatever somebody else
Right,
wants, even when they want to. Like somebody might be, look, I don't even care if you give me the adventure. I don't care if I get a hard copy of the adventure. I want it all digitally because that's how I use it, and I want a
right.
digital set of maps, and I wanted to. And I think the right answer is give it in as many options as you can, so that people who want to sort of piece it out to exactly how they want it can get it.
Mhm, mhm.
But that does, it puts a little bit of labor on, people like you and I who are want to just go out and get everything I need to run a thing and be done. So
Right, right. And I'm fortunate in that, I have a lot of stuff get donated to me by various people. So, I literally have 5 boxes in my garage, which has, like, all the pawns that I don't have for Pathfinder 2nd edition because I started collecting that late, and including all the pawns for all the APs that were made and a bunch of other stuff. So now I gotta go through that, and it's my 3rd
and
set of 5 boxes to go through. So, my shelves will become even fuller.
well,
So
and there are other people who have, oh, how do I put it? They have just as much stuff without as much stuff. And like, what I mean by
yeah,
that is there are people for whom, GMs for whom, look, the I got the core rulebook and the bestiary, and then a big box of
yeah,
miniatures I've had since the 80s.
right, right,
That is literally all I'm going to need to run anything. So I'm just making it all up. They've got,
yeah,
robust imaginations in order to be able to spin everything off based on the tools they have at hand. And they might even tell you, look, I don't need anything other than this. I haven't for years. And I'm
Yeah.
just going to keep on sort of entertaining my friends with the same small set of stuff because, we know what entertains us. And that's kind of, I mean, and that's sort of beautiful too. And then
Yeah.
a big book with a bunch of box of extra stuff is not necessarily going to be very appealing for them either because it doesn't give them what they want, right? Because they've
Right.
got what they need.
Right. I enjoy the battle cards a lot, I will say. Helps a lot.
Yeah, those are pretty handy. I think
Yeah.
that the I'm still trying to figure out a good way to do initiative at the top of a DM screen.
Right.
A lot of the
Right.
GM screen, it's easiest to just have everybody know what the initiative is. I almost like a whiteboard is kind of a good thing, but that's getting up and down a lot, and it doesn't really give me all the information
Yeah.
necessarily that I need. I don't know. I'm still kind of experimenting on. I had my old way of doing initiative that I've been using for years and years and years and years, and I've recently intentionally been kind of shaking that up in order to try to
Mhm.
find something new and what kind of products create something new for doing something like that, and how
Right.
might that work?
Yeah, I've actually, I liked how you did that, in that last, Abomination Vaults, how you're doing them across the top. I don't like a GM screen, and so that's
Hmm.
why on Mondays, I'm just putting them in front of me. So I
Right,
get the same thing where I can see, and people can see, but I can see everything, so I don't like to
right.
feel
Without having
closed
to sort of
in.
look
Yeah,
over the yeah,
yeah,
yep.
so right, well, hey, this has been fun. It's too bad we didn't have Jason. I think he would've contributed a lot, especially on the ISO side, but I don't know how much he actually could have speculated in that regard. So
Well, I wonder, maybe I'll ask next time, Jason, how is it you track initiative in your games? Right, just to get,
yes, yeah,
pin him down on
yeah,
that. That's
yeah. No, that would be fun. Well, I'm John.
And I'm Ron, and this is Digital Divination.